Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Ejaz Haider. An updated Pentagon statement says that at least 50 US servicemen are being treated for TBI, short for traumatic brain injury, following Iran's missile attack on the Al Asad US military base on 8th January. The attack was Iran's retaliation to a US drone strike that took out Major General Qasem Soleimani, a very senior officer in the IRGC. The US cable network CNN reported that although traumatic brain injuries are not always apparent immediately after they've been suffered, the disclosure of injured US service members indicates that the impact of the attack was more serious than initial assessments indicated. Tuesday's announcement is the third time the Pentagon has updated the figures for the numbers injured. For his part, US President Donald Trump, when asked to explain the discrepancy between his previous comments that no US service member was harmed in the 8th January Iranian missile attack and the latest reports of US troops being treated for injuries sustained in that attack, replied in a signature tactless manner, and I quote, "No, I heard that they had headaches and a couple of other things, but I would say, and I can report, it's not very serious," unquote. Trump's statement prompted the national commander of Veterans of Foreign Wars to say, and I quote, "The VFW expects an apology from the President to our servicemen and women for his misguided remarks," unquote. Meanwhile, Iranian media has claimed that the US E-11A battlefield airborne communication node that went down in Ghazni killed a number of CIA officers, including Michael D'Andrea, aka Ayatollah Mike, who was responsible for Soleimani's killing. Some news outlets also cited Russian intelligence sources as confirming D'Andrea's death. There's been no statement from the CIA yet confirming or denying his killing. To discuss this, we are joined by Dr. Ghazala Hayat, who's a neurologist and teaches at St. Louis University, and Professor Herbert Reginbogin, who is an analyst and joins us from Washington, D.C. Thank you to both of you. Let me begin with Dr. Hayat. Dr. Hayat, give us a sense of what exactly is TBI and how serious can it be?
Thank you very much for inviting me. Traumatic brain injury actually encompasses a huge range of injuries. So you could have a mild concussion, you might hit the door and you have that concussion, to like open brain injury. These patients or the veterans that we're talking about, they had what we call closed head injuries because there was a missile attack closer by and there was a huge impact related to that. So traumatic brain injury may not be evident if it's closed head injury immediately, unless it is severe. Patient may start having symptoms days later, some may have weeks later. Most of the time you hear about this whiplash injury or post-concussion after a car accident, the next day patient will start having symptoms. So it may vary from range of symptoms. So when President Trump was talking about one of the symptoms is headache, but the headache is usually, it's a very severe headache. Most of the patient is like constant headache. They have a lot of other symptoms. And it's not only headache. So what we divide it into, like they could have somatic, which is headache or other injuries or other deficits. Also, they could have cognitive, which is one of the most disabling symptoms. They might start having memory disturbances. They might start having irritability, which is emotional. They also have difficulty forming new concepts. So most of our soldiers or any traumatic brain injury, they're young age, and so they have life in front of them. So these could be where life, affect their life later on. And most of the time we say traumatic brain injury is resolved within a few months. But new studies shows maybe over 50% of the patients have long-standing symptoms.
Okay, let me as a layperson reformulate what I think you've said. A, there is a broad range of TBI, and obviously the severity will differ in terms of that broad range. That's one point that you're making. The other point that you're making is that, sometimes it's not immediately you cannot immediately figure out what has happened. It can begin with headaches. You've also talked about cognitive dissonance. You've talked about the fact that it can last, longer. So are you saying that since Uh, we don't have any reports about the missiles actually killing any U.S. servicemen. We're assuming that it's the shock wave of the blast that might have caused this. People might have been thrown across the room or jolted in some way. What exactly could possibly have happened here?
Exactly. I mean, we're just presuming, but with that, I mean, most of the soldiers there in different parts of the world, they are exposed to different kind of shocks. But this one was very high intensity impact. They might have been thrown. We know most of them were bunkers. I don't know exactly what the situation was. But even with this high impact, the sound and everything could have caused closed head injury to most of the soldiers, and even into their bunkers.
So are you saying that, beyond a certain level, just the sound can be injurious to the brain?
But very high impact, any of those, that can also be, not like just loud sound is usually affects, in most of these traumatic brain injury, they could also have hearing deficits. They could develop later on too, and they have like one-to-one hearing, or they might start having difficulty where a lot of people, they could not understand other people. So depending upon what kind of injury, where they were, it was just high impact, a closed head injury that most of these soldiers sustained.
Okay, so give us a sense of normal concussions where you, let's say, hit your head with a door or a wall, or you get hit by something, a baseball bat or a hockey stick, or you are in a minor to moderate severity accident and it's a closed head injury. What are the chances of recovery?
That first most important is like, just if I hit my head against I open the door suddenly, compared to if the high speed ball hit my head, even if it's a close injury, it depends on how serious it was. Usually about 50% of the patient will improve within 3 to 6 months. But most of them, if it was severe enough, it might last much longer. And then we also look at what we call pre-morbid, or before the injury, what was the patient, that they had, let's say, long-standing history of headaches. They had history of anxiety or depression. Those patients will have much longer-lasting symptoms. There are lots of what we call predictive things. We could go into the diagnosis and prognosis. Most of the time, we have stopped calling it like minor concussion. A lot of time our students in school, they're playing, fall down and come back, oh, I was hit, or soccer, which is very popular, and cricket in Pakistan. All those injuries, we should not take it lightly because they have long-standing effects.
Okay. Final question, Dr. Hayat. Even after the physical symptoms are gone, can there be a psychological impact of this?
Yeah, exactly. Dr. said there are like 3 dimensions to this, and we should not call it just psychological, we call it emotional. So they might have long-lasting depression, anxiety, irritation. Like we have in our football players, they will have just aggressive behavior. And usually, you might hear this person is not the same as before the injury. And we just all, maybe, oh, he's depressed or she is having these symptoms. They're all effect of this traumatic brain injury, and we should take it seriously and treat it accordingly.
Okay. Thank you. That was Dr. Ghazala Hayat speaking with us about TBI and the severity of the concussions, the psychosomatic impacts of that. Let me go to Professor Reginbogin here. Professor, give me a sense of why initially the White House Pentagon said that there were no casualties there, and now these statements with reference to traumatic brain injuries. Could they not figure out initially, as Dr. Hayat was saying, that sometimes it's not immediately clear whether someone has got TBI, or was it an attempt at first to not really disclose what had happened?
Well, that's a general medical opinion. The evaluation of such a condition is not immediately recognized in the diagnosis. And that's why in other cases, in other situations, it's elapsed time. It's very unfortunate. These are victims of war, and that comes with that kind of responsibility. But the White House was given the medical reports, and the president, in his manner, shared that with the public. As the situation developed for the different patients, another reevaluation and statement was made.
Yeah, this statement that I quoted was a statement that he made in Davos when he was asked this question. Yeah. So, okay, let's get to the politics or the geopolitics of this. Now, obviously, this is the first time that Iran has retaliated militarily, not covertly, but overtly, a declared attack on two US military bases in Iraq. Do you find that significant?
The situation has to be contextualized. America, with all of its power, will not endeavor to invade Iran. And Iran has not the defense, the assets, the military assets, to fight an open war. So it will use asymmetric, that means it will use different types of tactics to retaliate, such as the downing of an airplane or an attempt to send a missile. But then that's the way this conflict is developing because of those asymmetric.
Let me interject, Professor Reginbogin. Agreed, there's an obvious asymmetry, and therefore Iran's tactics and strategy would also essentially factor that in. But this particular attack, the missile attack, was a very, once again, a declared military strike, an open declared military strike, which I think is, while keeping in mind the asymmetry, is something which I think is pretty significant because it's not covert, it's not signaling, it's not attacking, some US ally, it's not doing some proxy killing, it is a direct state attack on the assets of another state.
Every attack is assumed to have a calculation. If we don't know really the intent of those attacks, and it's again a speculation. I'd like to contextualize again that at the time these attacks are being made, there are about 8 back channels between the United States and Iran to contain the conflict. In conflict, any conflict, it's about showing strength, showing resolution for its public, for its citizens. And when Iran attacked this site and caused these injuries, it could have been, again, a reason for war, or it could be a reason to downplay it. So there's a lot of speculation.
No, but let me reformulate my part. Before I do that, let me say that we've also been joined by Mr. Mostapha Khoshcheshm, who's an analyst, joins us from Tehran. So let me welcome him. Thank you for being on the program, Mr. Khoshcheshm. I am talking to Professor Herbert Reginbogin in Washington, D.C. Let me, Professor, reformulate this. When was the last time another state launched a direct declared attack against a U.S. military asset?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Well, I think when was the last, like the Korean War or the Vietnam War? Um, After the Vietnam War, I don't think the US has been attacked by another state. I mean, NSAs, yes, but not a state. Anyway, let me go to Mr. Khoshcheshm here. Mr. Khoshcheshm, the two things that we're discussing. One is, of course, the Pentagon statement that at least 50 US servicemen are being treated for traumatic brain injuries following the Iranian missile attack on Al-Assad US military base. And secondly, reports quoting Iranian sources and also some reports quoting Russian intelligence sources saying that Michael D'Andrea, aka Ayatollah Mike, was in the US E-11A battlefield aircraft, which is the communication node, when it went down. So give us a sense in reverse. Is this, can you confirm this story that Michael D'Andrea was in fact in that aircraft, since Michael D'Andrea is talked about as the person who was involved in the killing of Major General Qasem Soleimani?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, with regard to Michael D'Andrea, I need to say that I've not seen anything, any commenting on the side of the Pentagon or the White House or the CIA. None has said anything about it, positive or negative. So I don't have any kind of information to confirm or reject that. But let me tell you something much more important. There have been some reports about his death in a way that as if it's been Iran that is down the plane. That's totally wrong. That's been the Taliban, actually. And also, it would be naive to, say that killing Michael D'Andrea or anyone else would mean revenge for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Qasem Soleimani was much, much worse than anyone like D'Andrea or anyone else in the U.S. He was a hero, commander, the hero commander of fight against terrorism, as well as U.S. bullying in the region. The revenge that Iran is seeking is not tactical. It's not killing someone or a number of generals on the side of the Pentagon or the United States. What Iran wants is a strategic revenge, that's expulsion of the United States. So I believe some people, some proponents of Iran, maybe Iranians, as well as those that are standing on the opposite side, they are trying to always say that if something happens to a warship or to an oil tanker or a plane crashes in Afghanistan or something else happens in the region, they say that it's been Iran. Well, I think some are seeking revenge like this. That would be a wrong move and a wrong, calculation. It's not a street fight. It's a fight against the world superpower. And Iran's objective is at strategic levels. So no matter Michael D'Andrea has been on the plane or not, that's not going to be the revenge of Iran. Iran's plan is much more, it's broad and it's as at strategic levels.
I understand. I perfectly understand your point, Mr. Khoshcheshm. But in order to create that strategic mosaic, there are always various multiple tactical pieces. And those tactical pieces, one of which we saw, which was the Iranian missile attack on 2 US military bases. Then we don't know whether Michael D'Andrea was also part of that, as you say, retribution or revenge. But yes, the tactical pieces are going to be there. Of course, I understand that the broader strategic mosaic is about getting the US out of the greater Middle East region. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. But let me explain a little bit about the whole developments in the last 1 month. When they assassinated Qasem Soleimani, Of course, one of the reasons was derailing the public from Donald Trump's problems at home. He had failed to earn public attention and credit for the alleged killing of ISIL leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and he was trying to gain more credit through assassination of Qasem Soleimani. But that was, I believe, a secondary or tertiary objective. The main objective has been a combination of hard warfare tactics and soft warfare in order to eliminate Iran's main man in the Middle East, in order to wear off Iran's and contain Iran's influence in the region, considering the developments in Lebanon as well as Iraq, where they've been trying to push the public to against Iran before his assassination, and where they are trying to appoint a new leader or prime minister, especially in Iraq, with weaker connections with Iran. Everyone knows that if Qasem Soleimani was alive, then his viewpoints mattered a lot in, the rise to power of anyone. We do know that when Kurdistan, Iraq's Kurdistan region, was about to do a referendum to secede from the mainland and establish a new country in the region, it was Qasem Soleimani who convinced them to avoid doing such a move and retreat from their earlier, stance, at least part of Kurdistan, and they stopped doing that because of him. So the U.S. Actually assumed that they could, make Tehran, confuse Tehran and the resistant front, and push Tehran towards the negotiating table once Tehran sees that its plans are, in peril and under threat after Qasem Soleimani is gone. But of course, all those calculations now appear to be gone and to be wrong, and his assassination has backfired. It changed the scene in Iraq. It changed the scene all across the region. And then Iran's missile attack on the United States was historic, epoch-making.
Absolutely. Let me take these points to Professor Reginbogin here. Professor, Mr. Khoshcheshm's point is interesting, that, we saw protests in Lebanon also, in Iraq also, and Iran's name popped up at both places. And the protesters seem to indicate that there are local actors which are allied with Iran, and they weren't particularly happy with that. But with Major General Soleimani's assassination, that seems to have changed the dynamic. So instead of getting a plus out of it, the US seems to have gotten, essentially provided Iran with a further raison d'etre as far as its influence in the greater Middle East is concerned.
Again, when you're making such a serious decision to assassinate an asset, an individual, a person, then the question or the advantages that come out of such a calculation or disadvantages are weighed between what the military consequences of such a leader has for carrying out the asymmetric warfare on the Arabic Peninsula. Secondly, does the leadership of the Quad have any negative impact? Either the type of questions on the one hand. The other is it calculated or is it unexpected that this will have other consequences, such as a negative public outcry about what the United States did in Iraq? It's hard to assess if the military decision makers in the White House had included all these issues, but assuming that. So if you're asking about the public outcry, you're asking what is the situation in Iran, Is there destabilization domestically? Or did this unify the country of Iran against the United States? You know, that in itself is the calculation we won't know until this unfolds in the next weeks or days. At the moment, the United States is not in the best public image.
Okay, the United States is not in the best public image. I'm sorry, I have to wrap up the segment. Thank you so much, Professor Herbert Reginbogin and Mr. Mostapha Khoshcheshm. We shall take a short break and return to discuss a report that the U.S. dropped a record number of bombs in Afghanistan in 2019. Stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. A U.S. Air Force report Tuesday announced that the U.S. military dropped a record number of bombs on Afghanistan in 2019. The statement drew sharp criticism from observers who wondered what purpose the continued barrage of the war-torn country after over 18 years of war could serve. Isn't this an admission of colossal failure? Tweeted Counterpunch editor Jeffrey St. Clair. Who are we bombing? Why? What will it yield but more war? The munitions data was published Monday by U.S. Air Force's Central Command. Air Force jets dropped 7,423 bombs on Afghanistan in 2019, the highest number since records began in 2006, beating out 2018. The AFCENT figures include bomb and missile strikes, 105mm shells fired by AC-130 gunships, and strafing fire from 20mm cannons and up. Airstrikes, predominantly conducted by U.S. forces, caused 579 of the 1149 civilian war fatalities attributed to pro-government forces in Afghanistan during the first 9 months of 2019, according to the most recent United Nations data. To discuss the questions raised by the report, we have with Dr. Jonathan Schroden, who is an analyst, is familiar with Afghanistan and joins us from Washington, D.C. Dr. Schroden, thank you for being with us. So much of ordnance, but what exactly are the results?
Yeah, so the military's actions here are actually by design, as you might imagine. The ramp up of the airstrikes is part of a broader set of tools that they're using to try and pressure the Taliban as part of the U.S.'s strategy for these talks that Ambassador Khalilzad has been involved in. So those talks include a diplomatic component, which is obviously being led by the ambassador through his engagements with the Taliban in Doha, as well as his engagements with the Afghan government in Kabul, the Pakistani government, other regional players in the countries of NATO, for example. So he's been heavily involved in that diplomatic track. But on the military side, their job to support those talks is to pressure the Taliban. And the primary tools that they have to do that are through things like special operations raids and airstrikes. And so that's why you're seeing such a dramatic increase in these numbers, both this year and last year.
But Dr. Schroden, ordnance in and of itself, as also as we saw, and this not even at the height of the surge, there were on any given night multiple night raids that seemed to kill or net lots of Taliban, or at least what the U.S. military claimed were Taliban. But that did not really give the U.S. military an upper hand strategically. So this is an important question because we have seen this kind of thing. It happened with the French in Vietnam. It happened with the U.S. military in Vietnam. It happened with the Soviets in Afghanistan. So there has to be a rethink in terms of what exactly the military can achieve in support of, as you rightly said, in this case, Ambassador Khalilzad's diplomatic mission.
I think the comparison to the surge era is a little bit, you have to be a little bit careful with that, in so much as the U.S. also had 100,000 of its own troops on the ground back in that time frame. And so the number of airstrikes was a little bit less, or in some cases about the same as it is now. in part because they were supporting such a large force on the ground. And that force on the ground was able to exert quite a bit of pressure on the Taliban. And there have been quite a few people who have said the U.S. missed some opportunities to press a negotiations or a diplomatic track in parallel to that surge. You fast forward to today, the U.S. only has about 12,000 troops on the ground. They are not out doing the bulk of the fighting on the ground. The Afghan security forces are doing that. And so the airstrikes that the U.S. is conducting now are in some ways meant to compensate for the lack of troops on the ground. So the fact that you don't have that ability to pressure them directly through your own forces on the ground means that you've got to do it through some other means. And in this case, a lot of it is being done by air.
Precisely, but here's the point. Even when the U.S. had lots of boots on the ground, the U.S. Air Force, Marines flew support missions, close air support, also dropped a lot of ordnance to soften up positions, and there were lots of night raids also. This reminds me of, the reason I'm asking this question in terms of what exactly it achieves strategically, even if it might achieve something tactically. The fact is that, it reminds one, and I won't press the analogy, it reminds me of the U.S. dropping of ordnance on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we know where that went.
Yeah, so, militarily, what's it going to accomplish? Not much. But I think we're all at the point now where we recognize that there is no military solution to what's happening in Afghanistan. And so if you're asking why all these airstrikes, what are they designed to accomplish? The short answer is they're designed to make the Taliban hurt and to make the Taliban want that hurting to stop. That is in direct support of what Ambassador Khalilzad's trying to accomplish via his talk. So the idea being, if you can make them hurt and make them want the hurting to stop, that should strengthen Ambassador Khalilzad's hand as he is in negotiations with the Taliban. And that's the simple logic behind why you're seeing these large number of airstrikes in the last couple of years.
Agreed. But since you're familiar with Afghanistan, worked there, you observe Afghanistan very closely. Let me ask you a direct question. You really think that this ordinance has actually been useful in getting the Taliban to the table or helped Khalilzad's hand?
So the indications that I've gotten, which are mostly from talking to a wide variety of people in Afghanistan, other folks who follow the country and what's happening there, this is far from conclusive. There haven't been studies done on this. It's very hard to get any type of quantitative or statistical analysis of this type. But the broad anecdotal consensus that I've heard is that the strikes are causing the Taliban some degree of pain. And that at least at the rank and file level, where they're actually feeling the effects of these, they would like them to stop or at least to reduce in scale. Because the Taliban are suffering pretty horrific levels of casualties, as are the Afghanistan security forces, but the Taliban are as well. And so these large numbers of airstrikes are in fact hurting the Taliban. And again, there's a reasonable amount of anecdotal evidence to suggest that they would like them to stop or at least to reduce in scale.
Okay. I'm also joined by Masoud Rahimi from Kabul. Mr. Rahimi is a politician and a peace ambassador. Mr. Rahimi, we're talking about the AFCENT report about the amount of ordnance that the U.S. Air Force dropped in Afghanistan in the year 2019. And according to that report, this is a record-breaking number of bombs that were dropped in Afghanistan. You think that this activity has actually redounded to the advantage of the government in Kabul, or as Dr. Schroden was analyzing, strengthened possibly the diplomatic hand played by Ambassador Zalmay Khalilzad?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. As our friends explained some things about the peace issues between Khalilzad and Taliban in Doha, Qatar. So, as you know better, before a few days ago, the USA explained about that 7,423 bombs the attack to in Afghanistan dropped. on 2019. From 2009 until 2019, they start dropping the bombs on the areas. 3 weeks ago, they dropped bombs in the Helmand province. They killed all non-military peoples. It means all the drops become on the village. So these drop bombs killed the civil peoples. So in my idea, the drop bombs just by USA, it is not effect that Taliban is scary from them, but they become more powerful. See that right now it is coming for 1 year. Mr. Khalilzad is talking about the peace in Doha or many places, but they are just say what they want. So until right now, they are not accept the deal of USA because they want more credit from government of Afghanistan or from the United States of America. So from these attacks of bombs, only our civil people is hurt, not too much the tourist people of Taliban in the area.
So Mr. Rahimi, you are basically arguing and saying that instead of weakening the Taliban, most of these strikes have ended up causing civilian casualties, and that has actually strengthened the Taliban. Is that your argument? Have I understood it correctly?
Yeah. You follow the money straits from the Afghanistan until right now. Until right now, the all attacks was inside of the village. I give you one example from a few days ago in one married in Helmand province. There was all civil people been killed. This bomb attack for the married and all civil people has died over there. So like this, before a few days ago, the USA attacked bombs on the Farah province. They killed 100 people of civil people. So sometimes effect, but most of the times all is civil people.
Okay, let me go back to Dr. Schroden. Dr. Schroden, Mr. Rahimi obviously has a different story to tell. But let me add something to this. There's also the danger always, and you're well familiar with that, of the NSAs or the militant groups actually being coupled with local populations. So unless the strike is very discriminate, the chances of collateral damage are always very high, and that has happened in Afghanistan a number of times. And that's also something that the Kabul government, both under President Karzai as well as under President Ghani, has been talking about. So once again, the issue of the advantage that it gives and the significance of this assumes a sharp salience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, the issue of civilian casualties is certainly a tragic one. Both Afghans and the United States, frankly, would like to keep those numbers as low as they possibly can. The U.S. military does quite a bit in terms of trying to reduce those numbers as much as they can through as part of the operations that they undertake. But it is a fact of life that if you're going to drop bombs from the air, as a matter of course, you are going to accidentally kill people that you didn't mean to kill. I mean, it is impossible to identify with 100% certainty in 100% of the cases who is actually on the ground underneath the bombs that you're dropping. So that is an unfortunate sort of fact of a consequence of this type of approach. In terms of the backlash that Mr. Rahimi talked about, I think there is the possibility of that, although I would point out that when you look at the UN reports and their tallies of civilian casualties, the Taliban are still causing more civilian deaths and injuries in Afghanistan than the coalition is. So.
No, the last report actually put higher numbers for government forces than for the Taliban.
Only for the number killed. If you added in the number wounded, then the Taliban were still the major perpetrator of civilian harm in Afghanistan.
Okay. Anyway, this is an interesting issue. Thank you so much, Dr. Jonathan Schroden, for being with us. One final question to Mr. Rahimi. Mr. Rahimi, Dr. Schroden also said that the Taliban also caused civilian casualties. So how is it that when it happens, when the government forces do this, the people gather and move towards the Taliban, while the Taliban civilian casualties do not have any impact on the militant group itself.
Okay. By explanation of Mr. George, I want to mention one word. We are politics, so we know how to say the real words and what's going on. But what is different between the era of U.S. military with Taliban's? If it's true, Taliban's also killed the civil peoples. Yeah, we are agree about that. But what is different between the era of USA that dropped the bombs between civil peoples, and what is different between the military of Taliban's? So for sure, it's clear. Until right now, the civil people is hurt from this war. This war is, for example, start from long years. It's a big story. For now, the power of government is very become weak. Now they are do activity. You can go move from Kabul to Mazar-e-Sharif. On the way, all there is the way they are, have checkpoint. They have controlled the streets. They control the area. So the people is also right now making connection with these people, and because they are feared from them. So that is the reason. What we called for USA Air Force, they should drop the bombs on that place that the Taliban is on that side. If they don't know, maybe there is a lot of people, experienced people. We are here. We will help them. Where is they have settled right now in the street of.
I get your point, Mr. Thank you so much for giving us your observations. This is all for tonight from Indus Special. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Meanwhile, for latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news. Good night and goodbye.